Good day everyone, welcome back again to our basics. Today we'll be talking about data frames. Before anything else, I would like to commend the work of this lecture is inspired from the websites W3 School, jigs for jigs.org, and tutorials for our websites, right? So with this, let me start with our discussions about creating data frames. So let's start with our programming language as an open source programming language that is widely used as a statistical software and data analysis tools, and mostly some data scientists, beginners, and even experts in data science are using our programming language. Data frames in our language are basically generic data objects of which are used to store the tabular data. Data frames can also be interpreted as matrices where each column of a matrix can be of the different data types. Data frames is made up of the three principal components: the data, the rows, and the columns. So how do we create a data frame in our programming? So to create that, to create data frame in R, we basically use the data.r command or functions, and then pass each of the vectors you have created as an argument to the functions. Let's have an example. Let's try to create a data frame of countries. Right? Let's say, for example, let's name our data frame as DF. Okay, with a data frame such as for example CID, or the country ID. For example, let's have a vector of say five vectors, and say for example we have country, list of vectors, say for example Philippines. What else? Let's say USA, and then we have China, we have Japan. Sorry. And finally, let's say for example Russia. And then these are all string as factors. Let's just leave it as false. Alright, so we have our data frame here with our ID, the content of the data frame, and the string as a factors is basically, as of the moment, false. So let's try to print the content of data frame. Alright, so we have here. So we run first the code, and then so you notice here we have already 5 observations with 2 variables, and let's try to see what happened. So we have here the country ID 1 2 3 4 5, meaning range 1 to 5. With the countries, we have here the Philippines, USA, China, Japan, Russia respectively, and assigned to a particular ID. Alright, so let's try to look into the structure of our data frame. Okay, how do we check the structure? Okay, so the command is str, then df. Okay, that's our data frame. Let's try to see the structure. Alright, so we have here 5 observations. The data frame has 5 observations of 2 variables, such as c underscore id and then the country. The ID is treated as an integer with the following values, such as 1 2 3 4 5 consequently. And then for the countries, these are basically characters such as the Philippines, USA, China, Japan, and Russia respectively. Okay, so that is how we check the structure of our data frame. And let's start to look into the summary, okay, of our data frame. So the command is very simple. It's just print, okay, the command summary with our data frame. Right? So let's try to see what will happen. Alright, so we have here for the ID, okay, the minimum and the maximum, the first quartile, the median, the mean, the third quartile, and the maximum. Okay, the length, we have 5 countries. Okay, and each class are basically are all characters. Okay, so that is how we look into the summary. But of course, if our two variables contains numbers, okay, so in other words, here and here will give us also numbers, especially for the class. If it is in a factor type of variable, then perhaps it will give us also the values here as a number. Okay, so how do we extract data from data frame? So to do that, assuming we have this data that we ran a while ago, okay, so let's try to extract only the countries without the ID, only the countries. So how do we do that? Okay, so we have here the commands. Let's say for example R as the, let's say, extracted data, for example. That's our command, our variable rather. We have the data frame, and then our frame, and then we call the dollar sign to call for a particular variable that we wish to display or extract. I want only to extract the country, so I'm here, run it. Alright, so let's try to print the data inside the extracted data. Okay, so there you go. You will notice here that the data frame country are extracted: Philippines, China, Japan, and Russia. Now, as we all know, we have only 2 variables, as stated a while ago. Now we would like to expand our data frame. We would like to add another column. Let's say, for example, the main city, excuse me, of those countries that we have mentioned a while ago. Okay, so let's ask the Philippines, USA, China, Japan, and Russia. So how do we do that? Okay, so to expand that, let's call in our data frame. Okay, our data frame, and then let's say for example, let's add city as our third variable here. Okay, and then let's create a list, or rather a vector for the Philippines. Let's say Manila, and then for the USA, let's say it will be Washington DC as the main city. What else? China, I think it's Beijing, China. Japan, maybe it's Tokyo. Alright, and finally for Russia, I think it's Moscow. Alright, so we have here our data frame. Let's run. Alright, so our DFCT is now, I mean our DF has now 3 variables as shown in our environment. Okay, so let's try to put our variable to the city so that we can put the results and display it. Says for example our variable result, okay, with our data frame. Alright, so let's try to print result. Okay, so there you go. So we have our 3 variables here. The city is now included in our data frame. Okay, so in other words, in R, one can perform various types of operations in the data frame, like accessing rows and columns, selecting the subsets of the data frame, editing data frames, delete rows and columns in a data frame, and among others. Right, so you can refer to some of the tutorials given to by the GIX for GIX.org or W3 School and Tutorial Point for some more what do you call this? Some more informations about how we do that in data frames. All right. So that's all for today in terms of data frame. Next time we will be talking about factors in data frame, as I believe this is very important to understand how we do that in terms of converting values in our data frames or in our data or data sets into factors, values in the data sets into factors, as it is also required if we are doing or applying machine learning algorithms in our future endeavor in terms of the data science. Right, so that's all for today. Thank you so much, and see you again.